I'm Brandon Dawson, and this is The Distiller, a podcast about how we find meaningful work and how we find meaning in the work we do. My guests for this episode are a couple of close friends who practice similar, but not identical, pursuits. Christie Goodfellow and Beth Graves are kindred souls who both have, shall we say, slightly unusual jobs. Christie is a potter who specializes in custom wheel-thrown ceramics. She primarily makes dinnerware, both for individual customers as well as, and increasingly, for fine restaurants. Her work is beautiful, simple, elegant, modern, and without a lot of adornment. It's easy to see why Christie's ceramics are on the tables at some of the best restaurants in Cincinnati and Chicago. And full disclosure, I actually own a few pieces of Christie's work myself. Beth Graves has a slightly more esoteric profession. Beth is a custom toy sculptor. I won't go too deeply into Beth's work because she describes it better than I can, but it's one of those jobs that you hear about and you say, really? Somebody does that? Of course somebody does that, but how? I love that. I love those people. I love coming across those jobs, and I especially love getting to ask somebody, how do you actually do that? As you'll hear, Christie and Beth's friendship sprang up out of a mutual appreciation and a shared language and experience, even though their approach to their work is pretty different and the finished product is completely different. I was excited to speak to the two of them together because, well, they're both introverts. Their work is private. Yes, there's some collaboration involved, more for Beth than for Christie, as you'll hear, but for both of them, it's largely done in isolation, working on a piece or pieces until their part is done and it's ready to hand off. And I hoped that the opportunity to talk about each other's work might kind of grease the skids, so to speak, for the conversation. Of course, I do love the discussion of a profession I've never considered. Getting to ask someone who does something for which I have no frame of reference, how they spend their days, it's kind of like opening Christmas presents for me. But I was also really excited to talk with Beth and Christie about the challenges of their work, about the similarities and differences not only in the work itself, but in being a solo enterprise, in trying to grow your business one customer or one commission at a time, and how the creative work they both do jibes with the business hat that they have to put on from time to time just to keep things going, to get work out the door, to keep the lights on. We met with Beth and Christie at Landlocked Social House, a fantastic coffee and craft beer gathering place in Cincinnati's Walnut Hills neighborhood. More full disclosure, Landlocked is one of my favorite places in town. It's a frequent haunt. Andrew, Ann, and the Landlocked crew welcomed us in on a beautiful Friday afternoon. We enjoyed delicious cold brew coffee. I think there may have been a beer consumed. Gotta say, why aren't more places doing both craft coffee and craft beer? It's a great idea. Landlocked is a great execution. Check out our website, thedistillerpodcast.com, for links to Landlocked Social House's website and their social media accounts. There's always something going on. Pop-up food nights, events. It's just a great place to hang. If you're not driving while you're listening, if you're able to listen somewhere stable, you really should pull up our website, thedistillerpodcast.com, while you listen to this episode. We have photos of both Christie and Beth's work on the website, and it's absolutely worth checking out to give context to our conversation. It's the first time we've ever actively played with toys while recording. That may just become a regular feature. So without further ado, let's get into it. Here is our conversation with Christie Goodfellow and Beth Graves at Landlocked Social House on The Distiller. So first of all, cheers.
Sure.
Thank you both for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Landlocked, and thank you to Landlocked Social House for hosting us. So here's what I want to do to start, because there are a whole bunch of unusual things about this interview, chief among them that we're sitting with an entire table full of toys in front of us to play with, which is really great. But I would love if we would start out with you telling me what each other do. So like maybe Christie, you can start and you can tell me what Beth does for a living, and then vice versa. Yeah. I'm just interested to hear how you both talk about each other's work.
Beth is a toy sculptor, and she sculpts very detailed objects that are often from another artist's two-dimensional drawing.
Okay. For whom does she do this work?
For, I think it's generally artists who then end up selling their toys.
Okay.
And it's like a limited run collector's kind of toy. It's not just like
All right.
any kind of toy.
So you don't necessarily design the toy to start off with
No.
all the time or ever?
It's a little bit of a weird wobbly line there because most of the time I'll get drawings, but often they start as really sketchy drawings.
Okay.
And then they hopefully know that I can flesh that out into something that's less sketchy, but even these ones that are very symmetrical and very clean, it's like pretty sketchy. If you made it look like that picture, it would be a really wobbly, non-spherical head type of a thing. So I have to say, well, do you want it to look like this, or do you want it to look like this precedent?
Can you
This other precedent in the world.
share any of the sketches with me, and we can put them on the website and people can see the starting point to the finished product?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So if you're listening to this, go to thedistillerpodcast.com and you'll be able to see the differences between where Beth starts. And this is a fantastic menagerie.
It is a menagerie. That
what's
guy's
this guy?
name is Lonnie.
Lion?
Lonnie.
Lonnie.
Lonny.
That's a fantastic
It's
name
weird
for
to try
Lonnie.
to describe him. Because every time I tell somebody what I do, I'm like, well, I kind of sculpt monsters usually. Like, there tend to be monsters because that gives somebody a very general idea, but then not at all an idea.
These are generally all within the monster/alien family,
Yeah.
except for this
That's
aardvark.
just a
Slash
tapir.
robot.
A tapir.
A tapir with a blanket on its back. So that's the only one that I brought you that is like an actual existing animal.
It's fantastic.
But yeah, so these are all from other people's heads, and
Okay.
and I have, to different degrees, like brought them into the world, I guess.
Awesome.
Like the stegosaurus here, which is a stegosaurus with
Stegosaurus, I love
trees
it.
for his spines. I suppose that's mostly in my own style, whatever that is, because it was a really, really vague sketch, relatively vague sketch.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
So
All right.
I like that. But
Before we get too far, let's switch it. Beth, tell me what Christie does.
Christie makes hand-thrown pottery. That's the most basic idea of what you do, but the most pristine, thinly walled, perfect hand-thrown pottery. Mugs and bowl plates and what else do you make? Vases, plates.
Mostly
Like,
dishes, mostly tableware.
Tableware, yeah.
Okay.
So that's the most basic way that I would describe what you're doing. But
All right. And we will absolutely have pictures of your work on the website as well. So if you're listening and you're in a
Master
place
potter.
where you can, while you're listening, check out the website, go to the website, and look at some of the images, because I think that will be a great place to start to talk about the work. So how do the two of you know each other? When did you meet?
we met at that gallery. We always
we
talk
met
about
at
this.
Country
but-
Club Gallery.
Country Club in Oakley, but that was at least 2010, but I bet it was
Yeah, I was
earlier.
going to say 8 years ago, maybe. So
Yeah,
that sounds
let's
about
say
right.
2010.
Okay.
So, and we had a mutual friend that introduced us, and it was one of those like you meet at a gallery and you're just talking about what you do. Probably, I don't know what we were talking about, but I feel like we talked for a couple hours. I don't
Yeah.
know. I feel like we just instantly
Yeah, we kind of
kept
connected.
talking, and I don't know. Pretty soon started hanging out, but I don't remember the details at all. She's just always been
and then
there.
we had a mutual friend that I used to work with. So I met Beth at the gallery and then was invited to this other mutual friend's house
was what it
for a
was.
party.
I
And then
forget.
I saw you there. And so we sort of connected again, exchanged phone numbers, and then became buds after that.
All right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is your friendship like, are you friends and you hang out and you don't talk about work much, or is it a creative friendship as well? Do you ever like spur each other's ideas on or even collaborate on things?
I think Beth spurs ideas for me more than I'm able to spur ideas for her.
Well, that's because I'm doing other people's work for the most part. But we've talked about collaborating, and we keep being both too busy to actually
That's
make
a good goal. A
piece
2019
together.
goal, perhaps.
There we go. Yeah, it was
A little collaboration.
recently
Yeah.
a 2017 goal, but now it's going to be a 2019
I
goal.
know. And we said it on a microphone, so now
Yeah.
it has to happen.
That's right. It's on the internet, so it's forever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It has to happen.
But you let me take a mold class with you, so I got to learn a little bit more about clay in that way, because I use a different sort of clay than Christie uses.
Yeah.
But
Do you talk about, I mean, you both start out working in clay. Are there discussions about clay techniques or tools or anything like that? Or do you?
Not really.
Maybe a little bit when I come to visit you or something, but there should be more because there's so much that I don't know. And I'm in my own little bubble of the few tools that I use and the certain thing that I use that really not that many other people use that I know anyway. But I'm always fascinated by your knowledge of that, your working knowledge of all of those
I feel like
things
Beth
that you're using.
has helped me push forward with some ideas. For example, that button that I was working on and a couple of other things.
Oh, that's good.
Because like Beth, the work that she's doing is for other people. And until pretty recently, a lot of the work I was doing was for other people, whether it be restaurant, dinnerware, or place settings or planters that were for wholesale.
Oh, right.
And so pretty recently I decided, like, okay, I need to make a collection of work that's just work that I want to make in these palettes that I'm interested in exploring, kind of putting out there. And some of the ideas that I was tossing around, Beth kind of helped me take them a little further than where I was with them, which is really helpful.
Cool.
We talk more about business stuff. When she's helping me, it has to do more with an overall look at what I'm trying to do than individual, I suppose, because I'm working with usually one other person on each figure.
Right.
And they're the ones who are telling me what to do with it for the most part, as far as like formal issues go. But so for me, I'm usually asking Christie questions about, I can't think of any recent ones, but usually questions about how do you run your own business and make money doing
But
what you're
we
really
have
good at.
We have plenty of talks about time management.
Yes, we
and
do.
Invoicing
Plenty of
and
them.
ways to word things in emails to people.
Oh, that's true. I forgot about, yes, for sure. That kind of a relationship, which is very valuable.
Absolutely.
And that's why we can't even think of the details, because I guess it's that easy when it comes up usually that we can ask each other those things.
Yeah,
I
it's
suppose.
usually if we're feeling stuck about something or we want to bounce something off each other. Otherwise, just like normal friend stuff.
Friend stuff and like, oh, what are you working on?
Yeah. Well, these are the reasons that I wanted to talk to the two of you together. Number one, because I kind of had this fear that to talk to either of you by yourselves, you would be so reluctant to talk about what you do that we would just have an hour of silence. So it's already working well.
It
But the
would've
other thing is,
Way more awkward solo.
That's funny.
no, this is good. You both, there's similarity to what you do. You both work in clay. You both work by yourselves. You both have a creative pursuit that's somewhat unusual in terms of like what people culturally do. And so part of it is I want to talk about like just how you started doing what you're doing and how you spend your days and stuff like that. But then the other thing is that the concerns that you share and the places where you both kind of get hung up and are able to help each other are the concerns that are universal to independent workers and small business owners, and people may or may not have a network or a compadre like you do to talk about those things. So for somebody listening who's thinking either they're in that place and I'm stuck and I don't know how to move forward, to hear some of your discussions might be helpful. Or for somebody that's thinking, I want to do an independent creative pursuit. How do people do that? It might be good to hear some of your... So let's start off first of all, and just a brief story about why you both do what you do, how you got into what you were doing. Did both of you go to college for this?
We both went to art school.
Okay.
I went to the School of the Art Institute.
And I went to the Art Academy here,
Okay.
Cincinnati Art Academy.
All right. And did you study pottery, toy design? What do you study to get where you are? Just general art?
Yeah, the school that I went to, you didn't have to specify a concentration, and so I started off doing some graphic design and photography, and then got a little tired sitting in front of the computer and decided I'm just going to take a ceramics class because it's the opposite, and then I just really connected with the process, and so continued to explore that alongside of photography. And then once I graduated, I got an internship and just kept finding community studios to continue working with clay.
Mm-hmm.
So I sort of fell into it a little bit.
Okay. When did you sort of think I could make a career out of this, or this is something I want to at least take a stab at?
I guess that was probably in 2009. I feel like I really started selling my work and going to different pottery fairs and stuff, but I was still working full time. And it was about 5 years ago now that I quit my full-time job.
Okay.
And at that point I had started working with a chef, sort of collaborating, making small batches of work for dinnerware and stuff for him.
Yeah.
And
For his restaurant.
Yeah. And then I was selling some stuff on consignment, and I just sort of wasn't happy at work anymore. And
what were you doing for work at the time?
I was doing merchandising at a houseware store.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
an unnamed houseware store.
But still sort of in that world, you had an idea of what they wanted. You had an idea of what a buyer might be looking for.
Yeah, kind of how to arrange things, being surrounded by like designed objects.
Yeah.
So it was definitely related and definitely ended up being helpful, like going to pottery fairs and stuff and being able to merchandise my own work to sort of speak to the visual aesthetic that my work has on its own. Being able to kind of create that mood with a tent setup or something was really helpful.
Yep. And talk about a little bit about that. What is the visual aesthetic of your work? Beth sort of gave her opinion on it. How do you define the visual aesthetic of your work?
Yeah. I would consider it kind of subtle, like clean lined, pretty earthy. A lot of the color I work with comes from the clay itself. Minimal glazing. A modern.
You take the weight out of the clay.
What do you mean by that?
At least comparing it to lots of other pottery that I see, but even without comparing it, she lifts it up. Well, literally, you lift it up, but it starts as this lump, this really heavy lump that you throw in the center of the wheel, and then I don't understand how she does it, but she just elevates it. You elevate it into this like buoyant form, I guess. Now that I'm talking about it out loud, but
yeah.
No, but I've seen videos of people working with wheel pottery, and there's something that defies gravity and how you shape something and get that structure to hold it up.
Yeah.
And you make it look very easy. So that's why I'm picturing it like this.
Oh, thanks. It doesn't feel easy all of the time. But I feel like in my head, every time I'm making it, there's sort of this internal struggle of like, okay, you have to center the clay before you could do anything else with it.
Otherwise, it gets flung all across the room by the wheel.
Yeah.
Wobbly.
And so just sort of getting that bit of concentration is kind of metaphorical, like you're centering the clay, you're kind of centering yourself, coming to sort of like a quiet, calm place. At least for me, it's metaphorical in that way. And ever since I started, I just sort of had that sense of conquering this thin wall. And it was usually really wonky and off-center to start with. And then, I don't know, over time, like 15 or so years of trying to do that, finally feel like I'm getting a hang of it.
But it was something early on that you felt like you had a sense for, or like a feel. Yeah,
I guess ever since I started, even I have one of the very first things I ever threw at home. Still, and looking at it, I'm like, oh yeah, I can tell that I made that. That piece that's in the backyard. It's all
I need to look at it again.
It's like round and wonky, but.
Do you watch Ghost like once a day? Just for inspiration?
Never watch it. I mean, in the past I've watched it, but.
It's been a while.
Like anti-inspiration.
Right, exactly.
Is pottery, that's another podcast. Is pottery
But I'm like, should I
sensual?
quit? And then I watch the video and I'm like, maybe. It's a little too.
Maybe not.
I wouldn't want anybody that close to me. I recently hired an assistant. And so it's interesting having somebody else in the space because for me, it's sort of like you're doing this like personal kind of manipulation of a thing and you're kind of trying to be concentrated
and in a quiet sort of space, because if you don't, it's going to go all over the place.
It's almost like you have to think about what you're doing while you're doing it, otherwise it's really easy to lose track. And especially like Beth is working from a drawing, and I'm typically, if there's a new form I'm unsure about, sometimes I'll do a quick sketch of something, but typically I'm like sketching it while I'm on.
Yeah, you're reacting to what's happening physically with the clay, and it's in motion. Whereas my things can sit dormant for months. Like the material I use is forgiving in that way. It doesn't change form at all. Like it doesn't get too hot. It doesn't
you can leave
get too
it
cold.
And sort of walk around and look at it for a while.
I can leave it for years and years and years, which is actually a very bad thing. Most of the time, at least when it comes to my own things that I want to make, because they just sit in a box. But like I don't have that expediency that needs to happen. So I'm always very inspired by that part of her process, because she has to set goals for herself because of the way the clay changes from the moment you take it out of the bag. Yeah. Whereas my wax is, I don't know, it's just very it's in this particular state where it doesn't,
It's going to
where
stay
I
there.
manipulate it. Like I heat it up to a certain temperature and I use a little hot tipped pen, and otherwise it just sits there. It might gather dust, but it doesn't change or dry or I mean, at least it's imperceptible if it does.
Yeah.
So I feel like I would like to venture into that realm of sculpting because I don't have those. Yeah, like we did for your birthday a few years ago, or maybe longer. She had us all go to Queen City Clay, formerly not Queen City Clay, and we all got to throw, which was great and also hard for any sort of perfectionist that showed up, because it was like, oh, this looks decent, but it's heavy. Like the 3 things I did are the heaviest bottomed things you've ever seen, because we didn't like trim the foot of the thing like Christie does, but
Yeah.
it's just it all kind of goes back to the table, you know. It's still
Well,
a
there's
nice
that
little
marveling
object.
at the lightness of
grounded.
what she does. Yeah. So quickly, just because this has always been one of the hallmarks of handmade work in general is uniqueness and beautiful imperfections and sort of maybe what would typically be a lack of continuity or symmetry between the individual pieces. Maybe. Your pieces are very repeatable and symmetrical, and they're of a family, and when you do a set of dinnerware, they all have to fit together and stack together, and they all have to be. How do you achieve, in something that's so imperfect in the work that you do by hand, how do you achieve such regularity to your shapes and forms?
Technically, I just measure a lot. So I like weigh out the clay. So if I'm making a set of dinnerware, I might start with like 4 pounds for each plate that I'm making.
Okay.
And then when I'm making it, I have a dimension in mind. Typically, my dinner plates end up at 10 inches, and then I lose 1/8 of an inch per inch.
In firing?
Through the firing. So
Okay.
you typically lose anywhere between 10 and 15% of the size from when you start to when it comes out. So you kind of take that into account. And then I just sort of take measurements and I try to get close for each one. And I'm really meticulous. That's a positive word for it. Really meticulous about it.
It's inspiring, seriously. Yeah.
And there's some of that control that I feel like, oh, yes, okay, I successfully completed this form. Awesome. And then I feel like there are times when I'm glazing where I kind of let that go a little bit. So whether it be like drips that happen in the glazing itself, or when I'm dipping something in and I can't use a tool to dip it and I use my hands and I end up having some fingerprints and stuff, I kind of like seeing that in juxtaposition with the clean, like tight forms. And it's kind of a balance to me where I feel like I could be really tight and meticulous and then just being kind of able to let go a little bit. And I fire in an electric kiln now, which you have a lot of control over, but I used to fire in a gas kiln, and I've done a few soda firings before, and they're more atmospheric. So there are certain things that you can't control in those firings, and that was always kind of nice to then like have this control, and then being able to relinquish that control is always sort of a nice feeling.
It does seem like for any artist, there's a point. My closest association is music. That there's a point at which you have to let go of your thing. Rich Hordinsky, who was on our second or third episode when I was making a record a bunch of years ago and sort of talking to him about mastering it, Rich said something to me that I've always held on to, which is that records, and this could be applied to art projects, are never done. They eventually just fly the coop. And with everything, there's this point at which you just have to let it go because it's never going to be done.
Yeah, I feel that way every single time I send something out.
I know, I feel like that's probably a shared thing that Beth and I have, because her stuff is super detailed and meticulous as well, and it's so you probably get to a point where it's like, okay, how many
scales on
do I
Every
need?
time
Like,
I hate it by the end.
do I
like
need
every
to
project
add
I
another?
hate.
Really?
Yeah. By the end.
No, there is that.
I
There is
hate it,
that
then
process.
later I'll love it again. But
Yeah, but there is a point of needing,
yeah, so many
needing to get
scales.
rid of it, needing to have it move on.
that's exactly how I feel every time. But the thing about my process that's different, hopefully this isn't out of order, but just as a little parentheses, is that other people work on what I make after. So I don't have the end. I'm not the end maker, which is, I feel cowardly of me, but also, I can that's the process. I'm in the middle of it, I feel like. I generate the forms, but I'm sort of in the middle because the things that are on the table, at least, usually the wax that I finish will about half the time get turned into a resin cast, and then it's way more solid and way less marble, and then it will get sent to Japan. All of these are made in Japan by these little family factories where there's another wax process made off of the prototype that I send or that my client sends, and then there are at least 2 more processes like after that. And so these beautiful shiny things that you see are evidence of the marks I've made, but also evidence of someone working on them after me.
Do you ever get something back that is unrecognizable from what you sent off?
No, I haven't with any of these things. Maybe like when I was doing work for big toy companies where other types of changes happen in between. That's how I started. But these things, with the exception of a few details here and there, or things maybe weren't pullable out of the molds, to use a non-technical term. They couldn't pull out of the molds very well. Like maybe they had to adjust something in their wax stage. But I always know that someone else will touch it after me, which is it was such a relief, but also, I don't know, it feels impure somehow.
Well, no, but
it's a collaboration in this weird way.
That's what I was going to ask. Does it feel like collaboration, or does it feel like something not so nice as collaboration?
More collaborative than a negative kind of ghost of that, but there are times when at each finish of a project, I am hating that it's still in my possession for lots of reasons, like lots of psychological reasons. I will be like, well, somebody else is going to be able to clean up this little nick. Yeah, and it always feels like, it just needs to get out of here.
That's great.
It just needs to get out of here. So that's more complicated, and it's interesting that other people might feel that way, who have a different relationship with each step of their finished product. Because, mine just ends at a certain point, and then a few months later or a year later, it comes back to me in the form of a plastic, hollow.
Well, so let's talk about what you do a little bit more, because, and this is one of my favorite things. One of my favorite things is to come across somebody who does something that I never knew or considered existed.
Yay, I'm glad to. I don't know that much about it. I've never been to Japan.
Right,
but
so
I'm glad to be able to introduce it to you.
I have at least some familiarity with pottery. I took a 7th grade pottery class in Idaho Falls.
That sounds good. I like that.
Like, I never knew that, and of course somebody has to make the toys at the beginning, but I feel like most of the culture has no idea where that starts. So
I can relate to that.
Describe,
I was one of those people.
Tell us the story, and the story is how did you start? You said you were making toys for big companies, but then I really am interested in how many of you are there in the world? How does somebody get into what you do, and how did it happen for you? At what point did you say, well, I might be able to make toys for a living, and so we need to go back to art school, but then we also need to get into when did you realize that you could make individual custom toys for somebody in Japan in the privacy of your own home? Tell us the story.
From the privacy of my desk. I can answer the latter half of that question. The first half, I don't know how many there are of us. I can go through, say, Instagram and see when people tag, sculpted by this person who I've never met. I've never met any of them. And it's not even necessarily a competitive world, other than that it's small from what I glean. And from the idea that, most people aren't going to just run across these types of figures, which are called Sofubi, which means soft vinyl, as far as I understand. It's any of this would need to be fact-checked, but soft vinyl figures.
We don't have the budget for fact-checking. We're just going to take your word for it.
I don't know that, but I don't know if anybody would be listening who would be sending you messages about my facts being off. But this will speak to my solitary nature, because I'm sitting up at the desk looking at my picture or looking at my reference, sculpting things, sending them to someone else who then has to deal with the production side of it, which I'm also grateful for. I'm sort of trying to dip a toe into that and learn more about it through other people who have moved to Japan from America and who have decided to take that on themselves, but I have not decided to take that on. I'm just doing this part. So,
to interrupt you though, why is this something that happens primarily in Japan? Is it a different appetite for different kinds of toys?
It must be, but that's you're giving me questions that I need to start asking more of too, because it seems like it all stems from Godzilla.
Doesn't everything, though, in our culture?
Yeah, I think a lot more does than I even have an idea of, really. But I mean, Godzilla's the one that's the most referenced, but I don't know if there's anything before. I'm not sure if people were making figures of this type, which are multi-part soft vinyl hollow figures. Like, I don't know how else to describe them to someone who can't picture this right now. But
well, they can
it's
look
kind of
at
like a baby doll, a hollow-headed baby doll.
But pieces turn. They're not one piece. The heads rotate. Maybe the arms or the legs.
Yeah, they're articulated. They're slush cast, it's called, where you pour the material into a metal mold, and then you let the kind of outer shell bake or cure or whatever the process is, and then you pour out the rest. So it becomes a thin walled, like they're
hollow.
These are like a 16th of an inch.
Wow.
It's probably
like
thin
slip
or so. Yeah, like there are lots of corollaries with clay work, but I don't do any of them. So that's why I'm talking sort of like I dreamt all of this, because I send a solid wax sculpture to someone, and then it comes back to me as this light, hollow, shiny piece of soft plastic. So to answer, what was your question? To answer the question, it was,
how did you first find out that this was something that you could do?
Oh, well, I guess I have to go all the way back, if that's okay. I have to go all the way back to
It's all
school.
okay. Go ahead.
Okay? Okay.
Yep.
It's a short story. But I was in school. I was at the art academy down the street when it was still within the art museum building. And I didn't know what I was doing. And it was like, fine arts was the only thing that I ever not even knew how to do, but had been interested in making, I guess. Like, I'm making things, thus go to art school and make more things.
Sure.
And you're in the environment where that's a good thing to do. Everybody's expecting you to make things, and then they talk about those things.
Yeah.
Right.
So
And
were you
then
focusing on sculpture while you were in school, though?
I was if you look at the records of, like, if you looked at the transcript, it'd be like sculpture emphasis, fine arts major, done. But I was in total fine arts, especially at a school like the Art Academy, where I feel like it was pretty loosely defined. Mm-hmm. They had a lot of academic programs as far as, say, life drawing and learning how to paint in an old master's sort of tradition or things of that nature. I didn't do that kind of thing. I did what I was required to do, and then I was fully immersed in the world of, well, make something and then we have to talk about it.
Right.
And maybe it's not valid, but it's valid enough. It's valid enough, I guess. I don't know.
How did you end up at
I don't know what I was doing.
Sculpco, though? Because after school, you started sculpting.
She's taking over for you.
No, that's great.
That's because I know this part.
You want to hear the
you know this
story?
part.
Yeah.
Because you were sculpting for like you sculpted World Barbie's Panda or whatever.
Good
and
memory.
Pokemon
I
and
forgot
stuff.
about that. Yes, it's true. So in school, I don't know what I was doing. All sorts of whatever, different mediums as defined by the environment.
Let's be clear, which is what you were supposed to do.
Oh, sure.
Like,
yeah. I was not being rebellious. I mean, maybe.
No, but it's one of the great things about art school is that like a lot of different paths of education, professional education, career education these days are, ignore all of the other stuff. And it seems like art school is one of the few places where they do say, no, learn it all. Yeah. And then pick your specialty, but like you do need to know, or you should at least be aware of the techniques that go into mastery in other fields. Like that's a great thing because it's something that we lose culturally.
Both of us learned a lot after school, I feel like. Like we kind of dabbled in things and then
it was very dabbling for me.
Out. And I'm always still learning something, some new process or whatever. And I feel like Beth sort of refined her
I definitely
style.
The way that Brandon put it was maybe more focused and positive than I would put it in retrospect. Like, I enjoyed my experience at the Art Academy. There was no issue there. I met great people. I don't think I can define how it has helped me yet. I think maybe as time goes on, it's starting to sort of show up, but it hasn't manifested yet in my mind. Like, what exactly did I take from this besides the very obvious connections that you make with other people? So in my case, there was he was an adjunct there named Chris Daniel, who is still in the Cincinnati area. mostly a metal sculptor, but otherwise as well. And he worked at Sculpco, which is where I ended up working after I graduated. And so my friend Nick Paparone, who went to school with me, who was in the design side of the art academy, but everything sort of meshed in a good way. Like, that's what I loved about the art academy at the time. I think that it was all sort of just all over the place, and everybody was kind of doing a little bit of everything. He wanted me to sculpt a figure. It started with a commission. He wanted me to sculpt a 6-inch figure of himself for a self-promotion packet he was doing. I could not remember what it was, but so it was like, oh, yeah, I think I can do that. Because I had always worked with clay as a kid. I don't know why I thought I could do it, because I wasn't doing that kind of work at all. I wasn't just sitting and sculpting people, but it's like, sure. So I took some like really soft, and now with retrospect, really soft, like not good clay to work with for a tight 6-inch figure, and I sculpted him like during other classes. I remember taking the figure into some sort of history class or aesthetics class I was taking, and his girlfriend at the time being like, he needs more of a butt. And so I already had his jeans sculpted. It's like both very sloppy and very at the same time detailed. So I'd sculpted his little pockets, and I remember like kind of sticking the tool in the butt and squishing it out, and then sticking more clay in. And she's like, okay. He would tell you it was right, but he had these sort of dready, messy hair, and so it was kind of an expressive sculpture, especially for me, especially compared to this stuff. It's pretty funny. So I still it's like a prized possession, the one casting I have of this thing. So I talked to Chris Daniel, because he worked at this toy place, and he was like, yeah, we can mold that for you, because I had no idea how to mold things. They didn't have rubber molds and resin casting at the Art Academy. At least I didn't know about it. And so we went to the studio, and it was like, oh, people do this stuff? Like, people, it's exactly what you were saying. Like, oh, people make toys? And this is happening in Cincinnati? What? And this was up on Gilbert at the time. Gilbert and Kemper.
Okay. Not too far from where we are.
Or Kenton, I'm sorry. Yeah, but not too far from where we are. Yeah, and so it was a little studio, like 10 people. And at the time, maybe less, but... So I go up there, and I didn't have any money, so I was just kind of like, yes, thank you. Okay, whatever you need to do, help me out. I don't even remember. It's like a dream. But I think that's what made me realize, oh, people do this, and maybe I got some feedback from somebody there that made me think I could do it, or later, because I was going to graduate either that year or the next year. They're like, oh, you should come in and you should sculpt something for us as a trial and come talk to us. And that's what I did. Awesome. And so I sculpted some other character that my boyfriend at the time had come up with. It was a 2-headed turtle, which I still have in clay. And the clay is kind of gross now, but I feel like it's a talisman. It's like it's a very important
No, they're
object.
landmarks along the way.
And it was never molded or anything, so it's just clay. But, and it was good enough to get me in as like a starter sculptor. I don't know what they called. There were no names, but the place is called Sculpco. And I don't know. I'm very nostalgic about it now. So
how do you get from there to like what is the next step? I assume maybe the next step or one of the next steps is sculpting like for the larger toy brands.
So the work we did at this place, we were contractors for Hasbro, Mattel, Jakks Pacific, which I don't know if people know that name, but they did all like the wrestling figures, and they did lots of other stuff too, but we did tons of wrestling figures, tons and tons and tons. And so we did lots of Pokemon and lots of cartoons that were out over the years. I worked there for 11 or 12 years, so lots of popular culture came through there, but it was mostly that kind of stuff.
What happens? You sit down one day and somebody hands you a sketch of a Pokemon and says, "All right, you need to make a 3-dimensional figure, and it needs to be this tall." And
yes,
okay. And
Pokemon, as the example, Pokemon USA, that was who we were working with via, oh my gosh, Mattel. They were very specific, and so we would have rounds and rounds of changes on these, on each character. Yeah. And they were the most strict that we ever worked with, where it would be like the side view and the front view need to match exactly, and they would send back these overlays that were so specific, and we would think, no, that's not possible. But you're trying to justify your job. There's lots of things that I learned at that job, but
it's good training.
Oh, it was good training, and we would have little contests for who could get the least amount of revisions. And that only happened once. Maybe there was like one round of revisions. It was usually 3 or 4. So they were lovely characters, and we did hundreds of them, I think. But that was the weird underbelly of it. Like, it's not really that fun. Like, sometimes it's fun, but
no,
there are people who are on the other side of it who are telling you what to do.
Yeah, then these are the things that if you've never known this was a career, you never know that that this is what somebody goes through.
It's taken very seriously by somebody,
right?
You know, in a different way than we were taking it seriously. Like in a way of they are making lots of money off of these things, and the packaging, the size of the toy is dictated by the packaging size, which is dictated by how many fit on a pallet, which is dictated by what Target wants. Like, so strange.
Totally.
There's so much I don't know, but
where it can shelf and like, you know. Yeah.
So it was this whimsical version of that. Then I don't even want to see the non-whimsical versions of it, but that's where I learned that much about commerce, I suppose. But so yeah, we were making those kinds of things, and then we, on the side, the guy who owned the company, Tim, and my friend Chris, who worked there as a designer, and my friend Quincy, who worked there as a designer, we decided to try to do our own thing on the side. Okay. And at the time, we all had the time to do that, I guess. And so we were trying to make our own figures. And so we started going to Comic-Cons, the Comic-Con, the San Diego one, in 2008. And so we went to a few of those, or a handful of those.
To sell your capability as sculptors and toy makers?
Yeah, the first year we went to to just go and see it, and then to also get dressed up. We did that in 2008. That was a lifetime ago and was pretty funny and weird. So we did a cosplay thing. We made stuff up when we got there, essentially, but we took a bunch of costumery, and I think my name was Precious Metal. I was sort of like, to send you that picture. It was like a lot of like gold and silver lame, and like a long, proud moment. I got to be a different person for a second.
I'm sure it was awesome.
And we made it, so it was like a whatever. It was doing the sort of like sexy, not really air quotes, but it was very much like long silver wig, because I think I already had it, and like a short poofy skirt with crinoline underneath it, and everything was metallic, put metallic on myself. And we dressed up our friend Quincy as the dollar store kaiju, because a Godzilla is called a kaiju in Japanese. And so we went to the dollar store on the way to the convention, and this is so not what I meant to talk about, but this is a proud moment. And we just bought a lot of metallic-y things that they sold, like the things you put in the windows of your car to keep them from overheating. And we dressed him up in this terribly hot, awful costume that was really awesome looking. We sewed things together in the hotel room and like dressed him up and made him take pictures with everybody.
Is that where you met?
So I have a picture of that too.
Is that where you met Buana and some of the artists that you ended up sculpting for?
Yeah. So we go to Comic-Con. I can go on tangents. We go to Comic-Con, and we're starting to see these designer toys, which is kind of, I guess, where all of this stuff fits in, where they are made by small makers or small companies or individuals, where they are, I look at them as passion projects. At least everything I do is sort of a passion side project of most people that want them made, most clients. There are bigger entities, but the people I work for are like working as screen printers for their full-time job, and then wanting to make toys on the side. So they're coming up with the money and getting everything done. And so we were starting to see these people, and Tim collected, the guy who owned Sculptco, collected this stuff to begin with. Like, he introduced us all to it, I think. And so bought me my first kaiju. And so I'm seeing people and recognizing their names and being like, oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting. And so I remember there was a picture of a sloth that Buana Spoons had drawn, a card that he had made, and it's a sloth with a cup of bubble tea in his hand with the thick straw. And I didn't bring that, unfortunately, but that's the first one. And so I wrote him out. We just met him, and I bought the card, and it resonated with me, and I was like, I want to sculpt this. And so I wrote to him afterwards. Like, I guess that's the takeaway, is like, reach out to people. Like, all I did was write him an email. I didn't have to call him. I didn't have to do anything. It was just like, other than make the work. But I sent him an email. I said, I'd like to sculpt this. Yeah. And he got back to me, and we embarked on a collaboration.
There's so many things out of what you're both saying that I think you both take for granted in your worlds that are different from all the other worlds. Like, number one is there's a word for it now. There wasn't a word that I knew of, but even up until like 5 years ago, but like maker culture.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
And it's a word now only
heard
because
this.
like the world has gotten to the place where people don't make anything anymore.
Right.
You know, like people just used to make stuff. Like the idea was, you know, it doesn't matter what
Right.
I do for a living. If I need a piece of furniture or if I need to fix something, I'll go make it in my backyard. People had skills. We've gotten so specialized and so removed from those things that now anybody that thinks of making something for themselves or making a physical thing in the world is now a part of the maker movement, which is great. I'm glad that it exists, but it's
Yep.
like, it's important to say that one of the things that I feel like you're communicating that I'm hearing you talk about is that an implicit assumption in the world that you came from is that things can be made and that you may not know how to do it, but that you can do it and somebody else had to make it.
Yeah.
And you learned a lot of the basic skills and orientation to be able to say, I can make a physical thing. I worked for a very short period of time. I worked as a welder in between a bunch of other jobs. And it was one of the greatest things because so much of what I've done in my career is talking. You know, working on the radio, hosting a podcast, selling or making advertising.
Yeah.
And that was one of the few times in my life where at the end of a day, I've made locomotives, like welding giant trains.
What?
And there's something unmistakable.
See, that's something I don't think about people doing.
Right, no, somebody has to do that. And there was something about at the end of the day saying, I made that thing. It's made of like 12 tons of steel and it's going to exist for a long time.
Yeah. It's out there in the world.
Right, and it's a physical thing in the world, and I think that's something that people that are natural makers don't realize the degree to which for a lot of people who might conceptualize a product or a toy, like people, there are creative people working in non-creative fields, and they will typically say, well, I'm not a creative person. They might have a good idea, but the distance between those people and the idea of becoming a reality is very often the fact that they can't even conceptualize how that thing becomes a physical thing in the world. And it's cool to me to hear like both of you, whether it's a product of art school or product of what you've done, have this, first of all, baseline assumption that a thing can be made, that a thing that doesn't exist can exist. The second
like
thing that I think is really cool about people who have a formal or semi-formal like art education is there's an assumption of feedback and collaboration. Like, you know, very often people, self-taught artists, self-taught musicians are used to just going in the back bedroom and making a thing, and maybe they put it out or maybe they don't, but they generally don't have anybody else's input on it when they do it. Whereas my partner, Sarah Rose, is a poet. She grew up with critical feedback being a part of every single thing she wrote.
Oh, that's interesting to hear.
It is
because I guess
interesting.
not being a poet or knowing, aside from knowing Sarah Rose, like knowing many poets and how they work, it's sort of
Same.
interesting that there's that common critique, because for me it's like, oh, she just has this like thoughtful, creative, pensive mind and is able to translate these beautiful words that are making the rest of us think. So it's interesting to hear like, oh, it's very much the same or similar process to what we're going through, which for me, having a little bit of graphic design experience, I feel like that's identifiable to people. Like, okay, like you're working for a client who has this idea of what they want and you're trying to make their vision match with a physical object.
You have to tell them what is possible and what isn't, which is
So that's
sometimes-
interesting to hear that sort of carries over, I guess, through a
Yeah.
lot of different art forms.
I mean, I think it's something that comes from learning at least part of what you do in an education environment, which is, you know, for the poems in the poetry world, it's such a danger to have things overworked. There's a term that I've learned from her called the workshop poem, which is a poem that is technically perfect because it's had all of its jagged edges knocked off, and it's just uninteresting.
That's the same. That would work for.
Yeah, I feel
all
that way
measure of soy
sometimes. I'm
sculpting, too.
moving into some more mold-based production just to make a more sustainable living for myself, I guess.
To make what you do a little more efficient, a little more.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's sort of an internal conflict about is the replication and the fact that everyone is right on
Yeah.
way less appealing. Like, what are you losing by like not having touch? And although like my forms tend to be really similar from one to the other. Like if they're looked at closely, like they're made individually, so they're still.
And each one has to be worked after the
like,
fact. Like nothing comes out fully formed, which is the case for all sorts of production, I know.
Yeah.
But in your case, it's still a very small production line. But I understand the tension though, and I haven't been able to figure it out
like
either
how does
for
it
your
retain
work
something
either.
unique when it's
or how does it? I feel like there's a vulnerability to handmade work that people connect with when they're then connecting with that object because they see that, and there's like this thing that they can't name, but is drawing them to it.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is the sense that, like, so I have some of your beautiful work at home. There is kind of a neat thing. I don't think about it all the time, but like when I choose to recognize it, there's this idea that I take a plate off the shelf. I know your hand touched that. I know that decisions and care went into the making of that thing. Even if there's 5 plates, and even if technically those plates are all the same, they're all completely different. There was one, second longer that the glaze was allowed to drip off one than the other. There's a little spot on one where the glaze dripped off in a different way. There's, so all of those things go into when something is made, when a toy is made by an individual person, when a piece of pottery is made by an individual person. If you choose to recognize it, there's a symbol of care that, if you want to get esoteric about it, is a beautiful thing and a harder and harder thing to find in our world. So if you value that, there's a reason to support artists. I don't mean this to be a commercial for what you do, but what the hell?
No.
There's a reason to support independent artists like yourselves, because you have this interaction with something that exists in the physical world that came from somebody's mind and then from their hands.
Yeah, and I feel like we're in a time where people are recognizing that.
Yeah.
So I remember when I was in school, also coming from like a more conceptual art education, getting to the place where clay resonated with me because I was making a thing that was an actual thing. It wasn't this idea somebody was going to hold it, potentially use it. And that idea as its own concept was starting to gain traction. So I remember like the first like indie craft show that they had in Chicago was called Department. And I remember thinking like, oh, what an awesome idea. And Etsy was a fresh thing.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, this is so smart. Like, I get it. Okay. And now it's kind of mainstream that people are looking for this handmade objects. And I feel like people are able to value that. And I feel like we're kind of maybe at the tipping point of this pendulum of we had like all of this mass produced stuff. People are starting to realize that everything is fast and
the same.
and the same.
Yeah.
And so people are kind of coming to find that connection and personality and that like moment of pause that they get to have when they're interacting with something that's handmade.
Yeah.
So I feel like we're fortunate in time.
Oof, yeah, that's very
for that.
That's very intense to think about, but yeah.
Yeah.
It does feel, I don't know. I always feel that tension of, is this going to continue, especially with what I'm doing, because they're not useful in the specific way that Christie's things are useful, if we're comparing, but which I do a lot, of course, in general. But it's like, I don't know, because these things that I make are able to be made because of collectors. Yours also, I mean, those
collectors
are
in a
people are
different way.
collecting them,
Yeah.
but
Brandon is collecting.
I am.
Brandon's
I'm building
an
my
official
collection.
collector. Me too. Usually via second sales and
thank
trades,
you.
but it always feels very tense and I can't, and that's where I need to talk to other people who do what I'm doing specifically, because I don't know what the market is at all. I'm just kind of like, well, here's somebody else wants me to do a job, so I'm gonna do it. It's very seat of the pants and
Does your work
in a
come to
difficult
you?
way, but-
Does your work come to you from repeat customers, or does it come from you getting your work out there and then somebody reaching out to you because is it word of mouth?
Both, but I wrote that down actually. All of my work so far in this world has been word of mouth, which is really, really, really fortunate. And also, I'm not sure what's the word? I don't know, because I don't have a ton of time to sculpt right now, so I'm not sure if I'm really busy because there's that much demand, and I would be really busy if I had, say, 40 hours to put towards it every week, or if it's the perfect confluence of demand and what I can give at this time.
Right.
Because at this time I'm taking, I don't know, I'll have a project for months, and because I'm only working like 10 or 15 hours a week on it. And you know, if I had my druthers, I would be
knock it out in 2
more.
weeks.
Yeah, but I don't know if I would even have the demand because I'm not sure. It looks like there's it looks like it's critical mass just with the kind of stuff coming out all the time in this soft vinyl world specifically, but also there's a resin world, there's a bootleg resin world, there's like all these very specific things that I'm sure not that many people know about, but there are avid collectors, and like everybody's really intense about it. Like,
well, and it seems
which
like
is cool, but
it seems like the internet
the internet
is your best friend.
It is. I wrote a version of that down because I was thinking, like, I haven't met most of the people I work for.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't need to do the work. Like, I like to meet them. I like the community.
Yeah.
They are all lovely clients. Like, I've had no issues with anybody ever. Like, they're all lovely people to work with. They're always very grateful. I'm grateful. Like, it's like a gratitude. Yeah. It's cheesy. It's so cheesy and sappy, but we're just like, thank you. Thank you.
It's true.
Thank you for letting me do this.
No, I don't think it's cheesy
or thank
at
you
all.
for doing this for me, or whatever. Even though we're paying.
Well, that confluence of where the culture is at right now, exactly what you were talking about, is this reaction to the sameness of all this overproduced stuff. And even if there is something that you need to be relatively the same, like a plate or a bowl, you know, you want it to stand up, you want it to function
work.
a certain way. There is still like a beauty to experiencing something that has everything that you need to be the same, and then has all the uniqueness of having been produced by an individual. And for you, the effect of Comic-Con, the effect of niche interest families on the internet, the effect of the internet in terms of people being able to communicate with. Yeah. There might have been somebody in Iowa who was really into this particular shape or type of toy that they saw once from an advertisement in Japan, and 15 years ago they have no idea whether there's anybody else in the world into that. They have no way to get that.
Yeah.
Now,
that's interesting.
Like, that person can connect with their community. They can celebrate this thing and feel enfolded into this thing. And then there's a greater likelihood that they're going to really blow it out, that they're going to make it a part of their lives, that they're going to go to Comic-Con, that they're going to like communicate with these people, which only has to increase the demand for what you're doing, which is great.
Yeah, it's been really interesting and lovely and positive that people, normally the messages I get, it'll come at a point where I'm like, oh, I'm almost finished with this project. It needs to get out of here.
Right, as the next one comes
I need this
along.
out of here, but I need to get some more stuff in. And then somebody will email me. And I've like rested on that laurel for years as a side job. Like, this was a side job for a while, and now it's the job along with mothering a 3-year-old. But it's like, I'll get that message, yes, I can do this job. And so it feels very, I don't know if karmic is the idea, but it feels like it's all aligning, which is scary. It's very scary and very lovely that it's been working, but that's why there's always this tension of, should I be doing something else too? Because if I don't get an email, or if I don't have somebody to like bug, because I don't have a history of texting or emailing people and getting work. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that it's been the same for me up until this point. Yeah. Like, we've both been really fortunate to work with awesome, inspiring people who are growing our businesses through their word of mouth. And then you kind of get to that point where you're making a decision of when or why am I then trying to make more and tell more people about it. And I feel like I'm sort of at the cusp of that, and sort of like what's informing that decision, knowing when to make that decision. And I feel like for you, time is an issue currently, but I think if you had the time, because your word of mouth and your work is really strong, that you would be able to.
Maybe. I mean, there's at least a lot going on right now, seemingly. It's like you're saying, you just don't know if there's going to be, if it's going to tip over and all of the interest goes out, or all of people don't have money to spend on toys or handmade things.
But
or
I feel like people might not have this is my interpretation of what people are doing with their money right now, which from my bubble, this is what it looks like.
I see a lot more people than
I feel
do,
like people are spending, they're more intentional about what they're spending their money on. So they may pay more for something that they're valuing more.
Right. Rather than having something that everybody else has.
And just spending lots of money on something that is just going to end up in their trash in a year.
That's true. There's I don't know if precious becomes a negative word or not. I don't think of it as that, but there's a precious factor to what we're both making in terms of, because mine are mass produced to an extent, but it's like runs of 100 or something, and then people
the very
paint them
smallest sort of scale of mass production.
Yeah, it's still they're called pulls. All of the toys are pulled by like 2 people in a factory. Which is hot work from what I understand. So I'm like so grateful for everybody on either side of my little bubble. But it's a weird thing that I have trouble with.
We've got just a couple of minutes left. Last question is, what is the greatest challenge for both of you right now in what you're doing? And you may have already talked about it a little bit, but like we talked about how you began doing what you're doing. I feel like we've gotten a pretty good sense of how you do what you do every day, although I would love to talk to both of you about that more and more and more and have like video from your studios. But here's the sense that I get, and I might be wrong. I get the sense that both of you are in this middle point from being, well, this is what I do, and I've had to sort of like carve out my niche, to moving into a phase where, like, Christie, you can tell me if this is right about Beth. It seems to me like Beth is making a name for herself, and among people who know this work, that she's very well respected in what she's doing. Otherwise, she wouldn't get the work that she's doing. Yeah. It seems to me that for you started out in a small space, making wheel-thrown pottery. Now you have your dishes in restaurants all over Cincinnati, in Chicago, and in different places, and you're making a name for yourself in this pretty high-end world where your stuff is well-known and well-respected and being photographed. And so you're both in this transitionary phase, in this cusp of maybe taking your small little creative making venture to the next phase of it actually being something that you're known for. Tell me in as brief a way as you can, what challenges does that present for you practically or emotionally or mentally about how to navigate this phase and how to go wherever's next?
I would say for me, it was sort of making those decisions of, do I leave my backyard? Do I broaden and enlarge my bubble, which I love to be in? And then I just got to the point where my business is not sustainable if I keep spending 45 minutes on each dinner plate. So I'm kind of trying to find that balance of, okay, how can you make more in less time and retain that bit that is really special and that connection that people are interested in when they're purchasing the items. And so starting to get into thinking about making an actual career and have a sustainable income from what I started doing, because it was a process that I really connected to and I really liked. And so I feel like that business side is what is most challenging to me, sort of figuring out what that looks like, navigating all of the little details that are involved in that.
Yeah, you got in this to be a potter and an artist, and now in order to take it to the next step, you have to become a business person, which is a whole other set of skills.
Yeah, it's kind of like not my favorite thing. And I quit my job thinking, a friend of mine was asking me when I was thinking about it, what do you want to do? I was like, I just want to make things and have people buy them. Okay, cool. Well, so then I was making things.
Worked well.
And people were just like buying them, I guess. And now it's at the point where
buying them.
I'm trying to navigate that business end where, like, okay, my time frames are really far out. I'm breaking even as a business. Like, what do I have to, kind of taking a step back and almost like analyzing a little bit of what you're doing and figuring out how to move that forward and sort of adjusting the path that you were just sort of coasting along. Like, now you kind of have to like knock down some of the weeds and like be more intentional about like the direction.
Yeah, that's a good word, intentional.
Yeah. It's hard because I feel like we both sort of just like have been riding this wave of like, we love doing this thing,
I think we
and
fell
people
into
like
it
it, so that's cool.
Mm-hmm. And and we have work, which is cool. But then, like you were saying, I want to make things and sell them, essentially. And it's like, but then you have to figure out how many things do I have to make, and then what do I have to sell them for, and is that even going to work? And then that feels gross.
Yeah,
pretty
I know.
quickly.
It's like you want to make something because you like making it, and you want people to like what you like about it. You want that to translate and sort of create this connection with somebody else without having to be with them, I guess.
Yeah.
But if you don't make it and sell it for enough, there's a practical concern. You don't get to make it and sell it because you got to go back out and get that job and do something
and then
else
you
to pay the
can't
bills.
pay your mortgage and
You can't
feed
have
your
your
dogs.
backyard. Your dogs go hungry.
And I would imagine there's also, there's the Instagram effect of like looking at other people that are doing what you're doing and how they're marketing themselves and feeling like you somehow
Instagram
need to
effect.
fall into their way of doing it, which isn't the way that you need to do it.
that is a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sadly, I don't follow a lot of sculptors in that world. Like, I probably should
smart.
do
Not
more
sad.
of
Maybe
it.
it's
Smart.
good, yeah.
That is
It's
a
so
good
strange.
idea.
There are some people that I'm really inspired by. We've talked about this a lot, though. We're like, are we inspired or just discouraged in and looking too much at this other thing and comparing too much, and it has nothing to do with what we're doing. Blah blah blah. I'm sure everyone experiences that in different ways, but I'm just furrowing my brow a lot because it's like knocking the wind out of me to even talk about it, even though it's very real. Because it's very real, but because I'm trying to figure out if it's possible to be a pretty much full-time mom and also do this, because it seems like it would be. It always seems like it would be because you can work at night, but it turns out you're really tired after you eat dinner. And it's all of that everyone else has dealt with, but now I'm dealing with it, and I'm 37 and a half, and I'm like, what am I doing? So I feel like ever more childlike and ever more confused. I'm still doing it. I'm sending out some sculpts hopefully tomorrow.
Yeah,
They're in the
isn't
boxes.
that the best feeling?
It feels
I love
great,
going to
except
the
that I'm
post
like, this
office.
should have gone out
Happens
2
if
months ago. But I'm always nervous because they could break on the way. Yours could break on the way
We both
too.
have that
She
finished
taught me how to pack
date
things up even more lately.
anxiety, where we both are meticulous and run late because we can be slow because
we never learn how to manage our
paying it-
time.
and
I'll
we're
speak
just
for
like
myself.
having
You're obviously
detail.
doing it.
Yeah,
Still doing
but-
it. Luckily, everyone's pretty flexible in my world. Hopefully in yours too. But
Yeah, but then you have to send the dreaded email like, just wanted to let you know
It's going to be a day late.
I'm a month behind because
I have started so many emails with, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Apologies for.
Yeah, but now
thank you for your patience.
here's something we've
honestly.
had a discussion about. Thank you for your patience. We're not apologizing anymore.
Oh, that's true.
being
More
gracious.
thank yous than apologies.
Good.
That's our
You're
tip.
still sorry that it happened, but you're
business
thanking them
tip.
for understanding instead of being negative.
Yeah.
So,
But going to the post office and like getting the things on their way
yeah.
Having it be out in
is
the world.
really awesome
Yeah, let it
feeling.
settle on
It's
you.
a very good
Advise
feeling.
me to double box, which I am doing now.
Nice.
I've never had anything really, really break on the way to Japan, but I never insure it for enough, and I'm always afraid insure it for enough. So these things. So it's like the stepping back and assessing the whole thing.
Yeah.
From the bubble was what you said. Like that
Love
is
our
my
bubbles.
biggest challenge right now is to step back and like start keeping data about what's going on and then learn how to analyze it, because this was clearly nothing that appealed to me, and I was doing what appealed to me and what I then got good at over thousands of hours, but
that's the struggle,
there's
though.
the
I
other
feel like
stuff.
you have to hold on to the things that are appealing to you. Otherwise, you should just go find some
Right, you're not doing
random
it.
job that's going to pay you well and give you insurance.
oh, I've tried versions of that.
Imagine
that.
that.
Never worked
I know.
very well. Or
Yeah,
like temporary
and so
versions
I feel like
of
we
that,
kind
but-
of did that and it wasn't really working. And so now we're navigating a different body of water.
Well,
It's true.
you're both doing it. You're both doing it well. You're both doing good work.
We're doing it.
High fives all around.
No, thanks, Brandon.
No, be encouraged. This is great. We probably do need to wrap it up, but it's
All
been
right,
wonderful
thanks.
to talk to both of you. It's been wonderful to sit and see these little monsters in front of us while we talk too. So
I
we
have
make sure we
more.
have. We'll put pictures of
Someday
these
you
on
will
the website.
see a monster attached to a pot.
Absolutely.
Stay tuned.
Yeah. That's true.
All right. Thank you both so much.
Thanks,
Thank
Brandon.
you.
This episode of The Distiller was recorded live at Landlocked Social House, 648 East McMillan Street in Cincinnati's Walnut Hills neighborhood. Landlocked offers amazing third-wave coffee, craft beer, and food. They're open every day from 7 a.m. to midnight. You can visit thedistillerpodcast.com for links to Landlocked's website and social media pages. You can see their rotating tap list and a list of events. Just looking at their webpage right now, there are pierogi pop-up nights, Indian street food night, Korean hot chicken. There's always something going on. If you're in Cincinnati, you owe it to yourself to stop by and experience what Ann and Andrew have created. It's a great spot. And thanks again to Christie Goodfellow and Beth Graves for hanging out with us on a Friday afternoon. Their work is beautiful and inspiring, and hearing about their journey helps us not only imagine somebody else's life and work, it also gives perspective on the questions we're all trying to figure out. As mentioned, we have photos of their work and links to learn more, maybe even add some of their work to your collection at thedistillerpodcast.com. So please check it out and give them some love. The Distiller is produced, recorded, and hosted by me, Brandon Dawson, with co-production and booking from Terry Heist. Our show is mixed and edited by Justin Golden. Our logo was designed by Scott Ryan, and our videos are by Mike Helm of Minute Moments Pictures. You can find The Distiller wherever you listen to podcasts. Please do click that subscribe button to be notified when new episodes are released, and if you like what we're doing, please spread the word. The easiest way to do that is to follow and share our posts on Facebook and Instagram, and the best way to help us is to rate and review The Distiller wherever you listen. Ratings and reviews are the currency of search results for podcasts, and every one of those helps us show up just a little bit better for listeners looking for their next podcast addiction, so thank you. Remember, you can listen and download every episode of The Distiller and find information including links, photos of the guests, a map of all our show locations, and of course, you can get in touch with us all at thedistillerpodcast.com. You can also send us an email. Our address is mail@thedistillerpodcast.com. We want to know who you think should be on The Distiller to talk about their search for meaningful work, or where you think we should record the show. So please drop us a line, whether by email, on the website, or on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. We always love to hear from you. Until next time, thanks for listening. Bye-bye.